family. My name's Richie, and today we've got a special guest in, Lord Julian Fellowes. And some of you might have heard of him, and some of you might have seen him, and some of you have definitely seen some of his work on TV and film. How do I start with this chap? He's a Lord, appear in the House of Lords. He's an actor, appeared on stage, screen, and TV. It's especially one of my favourite programs, Monica the Glen. He's also a screenwriter. He's written lots of stuff for the theatre. He's also done the book part of Mary Poppins, the musical. He's also done School of Rock, and he's also a director as well. Directed a debut with Separate Lives, which is an interesting film to watch. And he's also the writer of countless books. One, Belgravia, which was a serial part that was released, and also a book called Snobs. That's well worth a read if you're into, if you looking at different people and classes and society. But also he came out of the acting world into becoming a screenwriter and wrote, at the suggestion of Robert Altman, a fantastic director, a film called Gosford Park. And out of that came an Oscar. Well done. That's absolutely amazing. And he's also got the Writers Guild Award for America. And that's a really, really hard target audience to crack, especially as a new writer to film. And then later on, he co-wrote other parts like The Tourist with Johnny Depp. And he wrote some program that gets interrupted by furniture adverts consistently on Bank Holiday Mondays called Downton Abbey. You might have heard of it. In 2019, he released Downton Abbey, a film, and subsequently a sequel to that, which was Downton Abbey in the New Era, which is worth a watch, especially if you're into looking at the silent era films and talky films as well there. And I'd just like to give our warm welcome to Julian, as we'll call him from this morning. And thank you very much for coming today. And I understand that you might have something special for us this morning.
Well, I was going to read a little bit of Gosford Park. I mean, not too much of it. I don't want to bore you all, but anyway, that's my plan. I must just say, I am rather fascinated by all these altruistic thing. I mean, we're going through this incredible period of virtue signaling. Nobody is allowed to say, I'm hungry anymore. Everything must be for others. But I just don't completely believe that that is a good motivator to create something written or paint or whatever. It's got to be something you feel interested in and something you want to see. I think that's it's not original with me. I think it was Spielberg who said, the film you should make is the film you want to see. And I think the book you should write is the book you want to read. And that's what gets you excited and gets you emotionally involved in making it happen. Anyway, that's my contribution. But meanwhile, I will now read a little bit of Gosford Park. This is a scene about halfway through the film, I think. They're all in this house party, a shooting party, which is going rather wrong for most of them. And one character, Anthony, has just discovered his brother-in-law is pulling out of a deal which will ruin him, and various other things are going on. And in the middle of all this, they're all at dinner in this scene, and in the middle of it, the hostess, Sylvia, is trying to slightly restore order and turn this very tense and angry dinner into something a bit more normal. Anyway, so they're in the dining room. Dinner is almost finished. In contrast to the night before, the atmosphere is terrible. George, Arthur, and Elsie are carrying round the savouries. Jennings pours wine. William is sulking. A few of the guests are trying to keep things going. Lavinia: goodness, isn't it pretty here? The house has such a lovely position. Raymond: the best views from the old water tower. We might walk up there tomorrow. I suppose you really do have to get back to London. Anthony: I'm afraid we should. When you're ruined, there's such a lot to do. This succeeds in further flattening the company, as well as exasperating Lavinia and infuriating William. The servants exchange glances as they labor on round. Constance, this is Maggie Smith's role. Would anyone care for a game of bridge after dinner? Freddie, I wouldn't mind. Constance, who else? What about you, Louisa? Louisa, I don't think so. I've rather gone off cards. I've never been very lucky with them. Almost inadvertently, she catches William's eye. He holds her glance, subdued. Nor me. For some reason, this both annoys Sylvia and spurs her into duty as a hostess. Tell me again, Mr. Weissman, what is this film you're working on? Charlie Chan in London. It's a detective mystery. Mabel, set in London. No, not really. Most of it takes place at a country house party, rather like this one. That's where the murder happens. Constance, how horrid. And who turns out to have done it? I couldn't tell you that. It'd spoil it for you. But none of us will ever see it. And that's as much as you're going to get. It was an extraordinary adventure, that film, for me, because I had written a couple of children's series for the BBC. I'd written Little Lord Fauntleroy and Prince and the Pauper and things, but very little. And some sort of rubbishy novels that I published when I just left drama school. But this was a big, big change for me. And I'd written a script that never got made, actually. It was for someone called Bob Balaban. And he was working with Robert Altman. And they were looking for someone to set a film in an English house party. And so I came to Balaban's mind and he put me up for it. But and miraculously, I was given this commission, having never written a feature film. And although it wasn't a big film in the way films can be big now, nevertheless, you know, it was a fairly substantial feature. So it all felt like a fairy story. But of course, what it meant was that on the set at that time, I had no status at all. I'd never had a film made. The children's series I'd written, no one in America had seen or heard of. I had no status. And so I had to try and defend my script without getting up everyone's nose. And in that moment that I just read, Robert Altman, who was directing, couldn't understand why it was funny that no one would ever see a film, because making a film is a lot of hard work. And he said, but why is it funny? Why is it funny that no one's going to see this film? And of course, all the actors started joining in and saying, oh, yes, Bob, it's not funny at all. We really don't need that line. Let's get rid of it. And of course, there was nothing I could say. And I knew it was funny. And then Maggie Smith, who I didn't at that time know at all, really, beyond, you know, we'd been working together a couple of weeks, whatever. And she knew, she always has a wonderful instinct for what's comedy, what is funny. And she knew she was about to lose one of her best laughs. So she entered the conversation and she said, I think I can make it work, Bob. and that was enough. And it took the line in, and it was filmed, and it was in the trailers, and it was in every edit of the film, and so on and so forth. And really, from that moment, my sort of love of Maggie as a defender of what I was doing was cemented, really. And of course, we went on, you know, much later, years later, to work together on Downton Abbey for 10 years. I mean, it was a long association. So it was quite a key moment. But I can remember standing in that dining room thinking, what can I say to save this line? But nothing came, and I needed Maggie's intervention. But anyway, I got it.
Amazing. I'm going to bring Richie in now as well. I don't think I could love Maggie Smith anymore, but having heard that, yeah, absolutely gorgeous. Richie.
You've already answered my first question that I was going to ask, you rotter. as an actor and writer and author, what sparks your flame of interest in a subject or a time and a place that you have to put it down on paper?
I think what I'm really interested in is a predicament where the reader or the audience can't quite decide which side they're on, and they change their minds. I don't really like those films and television and things where the makers tell you who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. And you're given a very clear instruction on that. And really your job is to sit, eat popcorn and see it played out. But you're not really invited to participate in any kind of moral judgment as to the different sides of the argument. Whereas I like it when people differ. I like it when families argue. Oh, she shouldn't have done that. Said it was her fault. No, it wasn't her fault at all. He pushed her into it. And that's what I like. And in fact, at one point, Gareth Neame, who's the producer, and I used to call something a Downton argument, which meant that you could legitimately be on either side. And there was a reasonable position to be taken on both sides. I suppose that's what gets me more than anything else. But apart from that, I mean, obviously, I have a sort of hat as a period writer. And I have to say, if you do get known for something you do perhaps better than most other people, don't fight it. And there's always a tendency among, you know, British actors. They have an enormous hit playing the romantic lead in some love story, and the next film they make, they've got leprosy in one leg and they're being condemned as political activists. It muddles the public. Let them get to know you and let them enjoy what you do before you ask permission to do something different. And that worked for me. And so that by the time I was doing, I don't know, School of Rock or something like that, which was outside my security place, I was allowed to do that. And in fact, the show was quite a big hit, both here and on Broadway, because at the beginning, I'd sort of made a pretty loyal following. And that's, I would just offer that as a piece of advice. Don't fight your own skill, because there are things for all of you. There are things you understand, whether it's, you know, shell shock or whatever else it may be. There are experiences that you understand better than most people. And you can allow most people to understand those situations better than they do. And that, I think, is worth playing to, you know, worth building on.
What I've seen is with ensemble casts, you have these fantastic character actors playing parts on your films and TV series, but they play different social parts or a social structure. What is your top tip for aspiring writers on how to write for different social classes and how they interact with each other?
Yes, I mean, I'm supposed to be the sort of king of class. I don't think class is the salient feature of any drama. The predicament is the salient feature. And whether the character who's in love with someone who can't stand them or whatever, whether they're a duchess or a housemaid, doesn't alter the emotional predicament that you're exploring. I think it's worth getting the details right, because it creates a variegated cast and you have contrasts of response and contrasts of reaction. But really what you're looking for is a truthful emotional situation. And I think the other thing to remember is that most people think their position, the position they're taking, is morally defensible. Most people think they are not being unreasonable. Other people may think they're being unreasonable, and the audience may think they're being unreasonable. But it's very important to me, it's very important to write a character so that an actor can play them, feeling this is a reasonable position for me to take. I don't think anyone in the world wakes up and says, how can I be evil today? How can I be cruel? How can I dismantle this family? That's not the motivation. What they're doing seems reasonable from their point of view, but the audience may decide, of course, that it's anything but.
With these social classes, in the way you mentioned, and there's a life lesson there that you've mentioned, that don't judge a book by its cover, and as such, like, if I could put you in a time machine and take you back in your career, film or TV or stage, which character do you identify with the most or want to play the part of?
I never got anywhere in Shakespeare, but I did rather want to play Buckingham in Richard III, because I felt he was the classic attempt to ameliorate someone who is impossible. He's trying to calm the king down. He's trying to come out ahead. And in the end, his own lack of courage and his own lack of confrontation sees him dead. And that I always found pretty interesting. But of my own characters, I don't know, I have soft spots for a lot of them, really. I'm always rather moved by Robert Grantham in Downton, because he's sort of based on my father. My father wasn't nearly as grand, but he had Robert's decency and well-motivated personality, but his same absolute lack of questioning of his social position or advantages. He never queried anything. That was simply the way it was. I mean, you know, my father believed that if God wanted you to be rich, he made sure someone left you a fortune. You weren't supposed to do anything really, except get up in the morning and get dressed. And that's not who I am. I'm very different from my father in that. But I've tried to give that sort of two sides of his character, the well-motivated, generous side, but also the absolute lack of questioning to Robert as a central character. I thought he'd make quite a good tentpole character.
I remember, I might misquote you, but you mentioned before that your father grew up in the world like he was in a pat of butter. Which is,
well, that was a generation, really, you know. I mean, nowadays, there is a fashion for disliking people who live in different eras because they believe different things. The truth is, every era believes different things. Some of them are horrible and pernicious that they believe. But even when that isn't the case, they believe things we don't believe. And my father and my mother believed that their job was to be a sort of two-hander called a married couple. And her jobs were essentially domestic and social. And his were to earn the living and to be out in the world and all the rest of it. And they stuck to it. And, you know, whenever my father's car would bring him home at about 7, I think, and at about 6:30, my mother would change into a cocktail dress, make a martini or something, set it all out so that when he walked through the door, there was the drink, there was the chair, there was the this, there was the that. And she was a kind of one-woman service industry. Now that's gone out of fashion now. And people would rather see her talent used more for the good of herself, apart from anything else, but for the good of other people. And she was a very clever woman, a good organizer. She could certainly have run a business very well. But I don't think that means she was unhappy. I think it means she was living in a different life with different expectations, that's all. And I think when you write period drama, you want to try and make sure that you're giving them impulses and beliefs that are compatible with the period in which they're living. I don't mean you can't have a character who is ahead of their time and who is having new ideas about how things should be, because that is truthful. There have always been people in every era who were thinking ahead of their time and were having ideas that would be normal 20 or 30 years later. And I think you can explore that. But what you can't have is Wat Tyler in the 14th century complaining about a rent rebate. You know, there is a moment where you have to realize that certain issues just don't belong in that era. And I think you have to be as truthful as you can be, really.
You mentioned your mother and your father there. I can see now there's a strong link there between that and your writing. You got the strong stoicism of your father, and your altruistic and the service nature of your mother, which is fantastic. And you see that in Gosford Park. You can see it in Downton Abbey, and quite played out very much on there.
Yes, I mean, she was a very strong woman, and her mother was a very strong woman, and within the context of their lives. And I think that left me with a kind of security derived from strong women. Some men need to feel protective and all of this stuff, whereas I don't really. I like women who kind of get me organized and get me into shape. And I've certainly married another one of them. And I do think that's a type you see cropping up in my writing. These women who have their hands on the driving wheel. I think that does come from my youth, yes.
Brilliant. I'll go off on a tangent from that. For those of us who's just starting our screenwriting journeys, what piece of advice would you give for process and pushing those ideas out there?
Well, it's a very, very difficult business to get someone to read your work who can make a difference, to get it literally in front of the eyes of someone who has the power to say yes. It's only slightly less difficult to get it in front of someone who has the power to say no. But somehow you have to keep going and just keep sending it out, keep having it recommended, keep pushing it out there. And I just this week, I had a young actor, about 10 years ago, came to me in Dorset because his parents lived in our village, in the same village as us. And he was just starting at drama school, and what could he do and how could he meet anyone, and he didn't know anyone and they weren't in the business, and all of which had been my own predicament some years before that. And, and I went to see him in a couple of shows and tried to get him some casting opportunities and so on. But he's just now secured his first running leading role in an American TV series, which starts shooting at the end of this month. And he's got his first leading role in a feature film, which shoots in about three months. And he's on his way. And the reason he's on it, I mean, I think he's good and everything, but the reason he's on his way is that he just never gave up. And despite having 100 dead ends and 100 unanswered letters, I mean, I remember when I was leaving drama school, I got that book, what's it called, Contacts, and I wrote to every single agent in the book and sent my photograph and this and this and that. I think I had 3 answers out of about 500 letters. That, somehow you just, in the end, don't give up. I mean, the one thing I would say is you want to try and get someone interested in your progress who has the power to affect it. I mean, I had 2 casting directors when I was getting started as an actor. One was called Maud Spector and one was called Rose Tobias Shaw. And they just sort of took up my case, really. Now that's fine, but you've got to get the odd job. They don't keep bringing you in if you never get anything. But as long as you get sort of 1 in 5 or whatever jobs, they will keep bringing you in. And Rose particularly, I mean, in those days, there was a fashion for miniseries, sort of historic miniseries made for American television. And they used to come over to Britain and make, you know, a lot of these shows every summer. And I think I had 5 years of doing a running part in a miniseries for Rose that really allowed me to eat for the rest of the year. I mean, it completely saved my bacon. And that was because Rose took a shine to me. There was nothing in it for her. There was no benefit for her other than the fact she was a generous woman and she wanted to give me a leg up. But there was nothing in it for her beyond that. But I think you do need to find generous people who will give you a bit of their time. And they exist. And there are nice people out there who are in the industry who will take an interest in you if you can just reach them. But it is difficult, you know, writing all those unanswered letters and going to all those auditions or interviews or sending in all those scripts that get returned with a reasonably polite rejection notice from some junior secretary, and you know that no one near the head of the department has ever set eyes on it. This stuff is pretty draining, and that's why a lot of people drop out. The only thing I would say, though, is that I think writing is an end in itself. And your grandchildren or great-grandchildren, long after your death, will be very interested by what you've written. Even if it doesn't get made, even if it doesn't go to a wider audience, you will give them the chance to get to know the brain of their own forebear and what you were really like. And I think that is a worthy and honorable goal in itself.
I'm going to be really selfish now. Just one last question before I open the floor up to members on chat is that if you could meet young Julian and go up to him, what would be that one little nugget of information or a bit of advice that you'd tell him?
I think I just tell him to calm down. I think I spent so many years eating my pillow in fury and going here and going there. And I think looking back, other contemporaries of mine who, I mean, I have no complaints how things worked out. I think they worked out well for me. I think I've been jolly lucky, but I had contemporaries who got going sooner than I did, and things started to happen sooner. And I think if they shared one quality, it was that they were much calmer as personalities and much less desperate. I had so much to prove, you know, so much to show. And I would like to get them a chill pill or get me a chill pill if I had that option. But you know, again, I think if you get to Rome, you must have taken the right road. And I now have a career that I have enjoyed very much. And I think I've had 20 years as a writer that have been rather marvelous. I mean, particularly, you know, starting with Gosford and winning the Oscar with the first film meant that I didn't have to spend 7 or 8 years catching up with I was immediately a player. And that was a wonderful shortcut, very lucky, very, very fortunate. And so I think I've been, you know, one of the lucky ones, really.
I don't think he was lucky. I think it was a brilliant piece of writing. So if you won't do it, I'll give yourself a pat on the back for that. It was amazing.
I think it's true that you probably don't get on if you're no good at all. But I also think you can be marvelous and never get the break.
That's a salient point.
And I think one has to remember people who say, oh, you make your own luck, you know, and all that stuff. the fact is, at some point or other, I mean, I know now, of course I didn't know it at the time, but I know now that Bob Altman offered the chance to write the film that became Gosford Park to about 7 or 8 writers who all turned him down. And any one of them, you would have thought it was going to be, clearly it was going to be the only English film that Altman ever made. And it was for that reason alone going to get a very, very good cast. And I'm surprised that the idea didn't appeal to them of doing a sort of view of the English country house life, which is what he was looking for. And they all turned it down. I mean, I don't know why. I suspect it was my dead mother whispering in their ears as they slept. But whatever the reason, if one of them had accepted, none of you would ever have heard of me.
I think we will. I'd like to say thank you very, very, very much for answering my questions. I'm going to do is hand you over to the Indomitable Sue, who's our Lady Dowager of Bravo 22. And I'd like to say thank you very much for answering my questions this morning. But I'm opening the floor up to Sue. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you, Richie. And yeah, that was absolutely fascinating. I am going to take away with me, be persistent but not desperate. I will remember that, be persistent but not desperate. Keep that in my head. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have got time for probably maybe 2 or 3 questions, depending on how complex they are. So does anybody, if you pop your hand up, oh, Alan got in there quickly.
Of course.
Mr. Grant, please pose your question to Julian.
Julian, I had a quick look, and at the last count was at least 60 films, TV, stage bits, etc. You're an enormously diverse writer, and especially mentioning the School of Rock. But I was reminded of a character by Bleasdale, who wrote The Boys from the Black Stuff, of Yosser, who walked around Liverpool with his couple of kids in tow saying, "Gets a job, gets a job." And I wondered whether you saw yourself as a sort of literary Yosser and say, "I can write that, gets a job, I can write."
Yes,
Anymore?
I think that was more me as an actor. I think that my years as an actor calmed me down. And by the end, I was never a star or particularly a household name, really. But by the time I got to Monarch of the Glen, I was at least working more or less consistently. I was very seldom out of work. And that allowed me, when my writing career got going, to borrow a bit of that calm. I mean, you have to remember that my first film was made, my first film script was made when I was 51. And I won the Oscar at 52. I wasn't a young beginner at all with writing. And I think I approached it differently. To be honest, I think that was to my own benefit, that I had sort of become less hysterical by then. Also, you know, I was married by then. I had a son. I was living a nice life. I wasn't a sort of sad figure on the edge of the village with a begging bowl, you know. And I think that was helpful to me. But I think I was much like that as a young actor.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. And thanks for that question, Alan. Kev, do you want to ask your question in the chat bar, or do you want me to ask it? Oh, where have you gone? Shall I ask it then?
I've got it. I just had to take my headphones off, because if I've had my headphones in, the microphone doesn't work for some reason. So, yeah, basically what it is, Julian, obviously I've written a few bits and pieces in the past, and I've self-published a book. It was actually my granddad's diary from the Second World War. And do you find that in modern times, instead of sending it to kind of like agents and stuff like that, it is worth putting it on like the free reading sites and stuff like that?
I think this is a difficult question because we're all living through a tremendously evolutionary phase of the arts and the access to the arts. And, most of us can remember when, there were only 2 channels or 3 at the most. And now that all of that's gone out the window. And although some of the television producers and things try to hold on to the old formats, and they talk about scheduling and trying to get a bit after celebrity come dancing, none of that matters at all to people who are under 30. They just watch whatever they want, they read whatever they want, anything that appeals to them, they'll go for. So I think although it's probably an easier starting point if an established publisher wants to take you on and do the publicity and flog your book and all the rest of it. Nevertheless, I think there are roots there that weren't there for people 20 years ago. And I would certainly self-publish and attempt to promote on the internet if I couldn't get any joy out of a publisher. I would also, there are many instances now of where people have started by self-publishing, but the book has done so well that the publishers then wake up to them, and the next book they may not publish, but they will read it, they will acknowledge it in a way that they didn't before. So I think we're in a changing universe, really, and you have to go with your own instinct about this. But the more you can make a link. I mean, what I used to do when I was young with casting directors was I used to write to them and say, I'm not looking for a job, which of course was a barefaced lie. I'd say, I'm not looking for a job, but I would really value 10 minutes of your time to talk about the industry, the present state of the industry, who's looking for what, how the television companies are developing, what's happening. Well, it wasn't always successful, but it often was. And I would go in and have a cup of coffee or something and talk to these people. And then, they're aware of you. And then they would be aware of me when they were casting something. My other trick was I used to write to sort of the guy running York Theatre Royal or something. And I'd say, I'm going to be in York on Wednesday, and I wondered if I could come in and meet you for 20 minutes. They won't bring you from London because by doing that, they feel they've made some kind of concession towards you. But if you're going to be in York anyway, they're not giving away anything. So they would almost always see you. Of course, I wasn't going to be in York anyway. I would drive to York for my 20-minute interview. But it meant that one more theatre controller, director, whatever their title, was aware of me and knew I was out there. And with these tiny bricks, I mean, literally Lego, I built what in the end turned into a career. Yeah. And I think that you have to just take any moment. It's like I always tell the young actors to go to things, go to first nights, go to pub theatre, go into the bar afterwards and try and meet the cast, meet the director, meet anyone, meet the people who are making tea, because you want to make relationships with people who are in the industry that you're trying to get into. And I think that's very much part of it. But I think, it's your right to have self-published, and you should be able, in my view, to build on that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Fantastic answer, Julian. Now we've got questions from Trevor, Neil, and one in the chat box from Sazzle. So Sazzle, do you want to kick off? Do you want to read yours? And then we'll go to Trevor and then Neil, if that's okay.
So I will try to read this. So I'm going to go off piece here. I'm doing art history degree and I've just done an assignment on Pugin, can't say it, who's a 19th century architect, and he was responsible for doing a lot of the Palace of Westminster after it was burnt down. So how did you feel when you walked into it, and especially in the Lord's Chamber, because it's epic?
Well, I love Pugin's work anyway, and I love Gothic, and his kind of reinterpretation of Gothic, which wasn't quite Regency fairy story, but at the same time wasn't that very heavy ecclesiastical style that came later, I think is a marvelous school of architecture. And of course, he worked with Barry, as you know, quite a lot. And I spent a lot of time shooting at Highclere Castle, which was built by Barry along Puginesque lines. And so that kind of domestic Gothic that they developed, I'm a big fan of. I mean, the House of Lords, the chamber, is a marvelous piece of work. Of course, when Pugin designed it, it was the dominant chamber in government, and the Commons was the lesser chamber. So its treatment architecturally is much simpler. The treatment of the Lords is much more elaborate, much more magnificent, and the coats of arms of all the current peers at that time, and so on, and all of it. So there's a sort of song about it. And the monarch's throne there with the two thrones on either side, which, you know, are part of it. And they're never filled. They're always empty, as a reminder that the sovereign is in charge, but is not present. The Speaker of the Lords, which is a new creation, as you know, from Mr. Blair, nevertheless, he only sits on the woolsack. He doesn't sit on the throne. All of that I find very romantic, I suppose, for want of a better word, and sort of emotional. So, I mean, I'm a big believer in the message of architecture. I think you can tell so much about what a civilization thinks of themselves by the buildings they build. And sometimes it's difficult not to feel that in the end of the 60s and the 1970s particularly, we had a pretty bleak view of ourselves. And there are very few of those buildings that one would see go with much of a pang. But nevertheless, some of them, even the brutalist, the brutalism of those public car parks and public buildings and so on, is quite an interesting statement about how we thought of ourselves, as long as we don't have to look at them from our drawing room window. That's my simple principle.
I will let you get back to the other side of the arts, but thank you for answering that for me.
No, my pleasure.
You'll have to plagiarize that in one of your essays.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Julian. And Trevor, your question, please.
Hi, Julian. I was looking at a review of Snobs and noticed that there was a mention of my late friend Hardy Ames in there. And I also know that your lovely wife came to his memorial service at St James's in Piccadilly. I was just wondering, I think his role in the SOE during the Second World War is vastly underappreciated. I just wondered if you would ever consider making a film about his life, particularly focused around his role in the SOE.
Yes, I mean, I agree with you. I think it is a very, very interesting story. And of course, his public image as the sort of couturier for great ladies is rather at odds with his war record, which is extraordinary. And clearly, he was a very brave man and a very intelligent one, and was very, very helpful and useful to the British war effort. So I absolutely endorse that. Whether it's my job or someone else's, I don't know. Emma was very fond of him. And when she was young, some of the fashion houses, you know, they have to deal with the fact that a lot of the women who can afford their clothes are sort of short and fat and not a particularly good advertisement for them. And so they tend to, you know, they find these young girls who are very good looking and sort of stylish, And one of the things the fashion houses tended to do then, I don't know if they do now, it was to allow them to come to the sale days, but the day before. So they could pick from the clothes on offer for the sale and buy them at sale prices, because they knew it wasn't all altruistic. They knew that then there would be these pictures in the Tatler or whatever of these lovely girls in their 20s showing off these sensational clothes. So it was a pretty mutual arrangement, but they were particularly kind to Emma, and she very much appreciated that. So she wanted to be there at his memorial.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you, Trevor. And I think we've probably just got time for Neil's question, if that's all right. Neil, if you unmute yourself, please ask your question.
I will do that. Okay. Well, the question's not really got enough time for, but I'd just like to thank Julian for his time there and giving us support. You know, I think that serving members and veterans are some of the best actors in the world. You know, we wrote our own scripts, we did our own stunts, and you know, we certainly weren't in it for the money. So we have a lot of experience to contribute, and also talent and teamwork, which I think are our strengths. But it's so good to get you know, connections and support and possibly opportunities. So I'd like to thank you. Now we're injured and older, you know, we've not always got as much energy as we could have had when we were younger if we were doing it. So thank you.
That's lovely, Neil. That's
kind of you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Beautifully put, Neil, really beautifully put. And with that, I am also going to add my thanks before I hand over to Stella for a checkout. That was absolutely fascinating. You are so, and I'm beautifully eloquent, Julian. You bring everything to life. It's just like mental pictures. It was gorgeous and incredibly useful. Your tips and advice, I think we will all take something away with us. And in fact, with that might be what Stella is going to talk about with the checkout. But I won't steal Stella's thunder. Just, can we have a round of applause, please, for Lord Julian Fellowes? And thank you, Richie, as well, very much. That was gorgeous.
I just want to say one thing, and that is, keep writing. Of course, you must keep trying to get them read and published and printed and made into films or whatever. You have to keep going with all of that, but keep writing. I know one chap was talking about how it's taken him 10 years to do his memoirs, and they're not finished yet. Keep going and put the end. I mean, one people said, do you have any sort of trick or whatever you do? The one trick I have, and really, no, two, I have two tricks. One is, don't finish for the day until you know the next bit. So that when you sit down the next day, you know what you're going to do first. The rest may be difficult in coming, but you know what you're going to do first. Don't write to the end of your vision. And the other thing is, keep going until you put the end. Then go back and rewrite everything. But if you keep going back over the first 30 pages, you'll never get to page 31. Just make sure you keep writing. And even if it's, as I've said, for the benefit of your descendants, that's still not nothing.
Amazing, amazing tips. Two more gems there for everybody. And with that, Stella, I'm going to hand over to you to do the checkout, please.
Thanks, Sue. I just want to add my thanks as well. There's so much to metabolize there of what you've said, and so many of my, as you were speaking, so many thoughts that I had going this way and that, and I'm sure everyone else did too. So thank you so much, Julian, and also Richie for being a very eloquent interviewer. Thank you so much. So I thought we could return back to this writing, what Sue asked at the beginning for the check-in, and what we wanted to write. And perhaps that has changed now after the first hour. Maybe it changed after Julian's first remark about altruism. Mine hasn't, because mine was not altruistic at all. I thought we could share maybe one think that we're going to do next about our writing? Maybe it's thinking about it, or maybe it's I'm going to go and write down something this afternoon. What I'm going to do is I am going to carve out some time this evening to do some writing, I think. So thank you, Julian. And I will go to Andrea Taylor-Haynes.
Hi there. I've had the pleasure of working in the Manchester Exchange here in Manchester, and I've written a couple of short stories. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and try to expand that and write more dialogue, probably turn one into a play and have a bit of a challenge. Yes.
Amazing. Great start. Andrea Green.
I'm really interested in what you said about the architecture and how we thought about each other at the time. And it's important to learn from history. And I've always felt that we should always look at what's going on around us. And, you know, London is a brilliant place for looking at different architecture, what's wrong and what's not. And I'm going to take away what you said about that, because I thought that was lovely. You know, you look at the 60s and I don't remember thinking we were grey and tower blocky at the time. I thought we were all very fashionable and, you know, so.
You see, it can be such a window. I'm doing at the moment a series for HBO called The Gilded Age. And I always tell people, go to the university club, go to this, go to that. If you want to get a handle on how these people felt about themselves, these rooms will tell you. And I think it's very important. I mean, one of the best bits of that job has been filming in Newport on Rhode Island, where a lot of these sort of mini palaces really survived from the days when they used to go down there for the summer. And they would all live in these little versions of the Petit Trianon and so on. And they're all still there. And it gives you such a clear understanding of who they thought they were.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, it was so I really enjoyed that. So thank you. And the Lego bit, of course.
Thanks, Andrea. Tip.
Not sure he can hear.
I'm completely frozen, so I'm going to skip over Tip and go to T Greener. You're on mute, T.
Sorry.
Don't worry.
Schoolgirl error. I think there was so much.
You got me a comms.
Oh, hang on, Tip's come back.
You go first, T.
Yeah, you go first, T, and then we'll go back to you, Tip.
Okay. Oh, there was just so much in there to reflect on. But I mean, there was an absolutely classic line, which was, don't keep rereading the first 30 pages or you'll never get to 31, which is the one that I'm going to remember.
Brilliant. Thanks, T. Tip, you're on mute, but I think you're unfrozen. Perfect.
Yeah, I'm back on. Apologies, I'm on a train, but I got the full thing.
Oh.
Thank you very much for that. It was incredible. But for me, it's I have to get my procrastinating and get behind my computer.
Yes, brilliant. Thanks, Tip. Spencer.
Can I first say, Julian, that was really, really inspirational and has given me so much to think about. But there are two things. And the first one, I'm sorry, it's not a masterpiece, but I do a blog every now and then. And you've just reminded me I need to write another one. So thank you for that. And the second one is some of the stuff that you've thrown in there. I do talks to schools and things. There is so much in that. For example, Never Go Up, which is all about resilience, and it's given me stuff to give back to others. So thank you.
Brilliant.
I think it's very important to do things, even if you do a piece of writing about an emotional situation that you've understood because you've been through it, and you just have it as a piece of writing, and that's helping. Later, maybe, you know, we're all squirrels with our pouches, and later you may use it in something. You may find a use for it. But even if you don't, it's still a very helpful and useful thing to do, to read it again in a month and think, does that actually convey the emotional predicament I'm trying to convey, or am I missing some element of it? And for me, you can't tell that the next day because you're still full of all the thoughts you had when you were writing. You need to be away from it for a bit. And then you come back and you realize you've missed one key element of the whole thing. All of those exercises keep you a writer. And I think that's important, really.
Thank you.
Kev?
Hi, yeah, first of all, thank you very much. It might get a bit loud because I live right next to the airport where the red arrows go from, so it might get a bit loud in a sec. But yeah, really, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us today. That was absolutely amazing. I'm gonna revisit some of the writing that I've done in the past. Things have been a bit sway just recently, and I'd just like to mention as well, because I thought you was absolutely amazing in Sharp. That is my hands down my best ever TV program ever, and the roles you played in there, the 2 roles you played in that were absolutely amazing. And
funny enough,
yeah.
I've got a Sharp reunion coming up next week or the week after, and I haven't seen most of them since I finished on Sharp, so it's rather extraordinary, really. And all our lives have gone in completely different directions, but it was a very nice job. But of course, it had a traumatic beginning, as you may remember.
Yeah.
And they changed the actors playing the lead, and Sean came, and so on and so forth. So it was all pretty hysterical. And it was a time we were filming in the Crimea, just as communism was breaking down and the Soviet Union was coming to an end. So it was the whole job was extraordinary, really, from any number of different aspects. But anyway, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Trevor?
Thank you very much for your talk today, Julian. I think one of the things I've got out of it is having put the translation to one side, I've been considering writing a book called There's Nothing So Extraordinary as an Ordinary Life Lived, and talking about class, coming from a working class background, to write about all the most amazing things that I've been able to do and achieve over my life, to give a leg up to other people who started what will start out in my position, and make them realise that they can achieve the things that they think they can't.
I think that's a very, very key element. And I think it's a responsibility of drama not to be entirely hopeless. That one of the jobs of the dramatist, I don't mean the only job, and you certainly, tragedy has its place and all the rest of it, but I do think it's important to give members of communities that are not showered with opportunities the idea that things are possible if you stick at it. And I believe that, and I've seen enough of it, God knows, in my own business. So I think that's a really worthwhile thing to do. I applaud that.
Thank you both. Sarah?
Just to reflect what everyone else has said, it's been a fabulous session. Thank you. And I think there's something really interesting in what you were saying about like not fighting your own skills. So not sort of, there are things that we all understand better than other people. So just bearing that in mind and having that as a starting point, I thought was a really interesting point and something we probably all overlook.
Good. And I've never done a course in writing or any of those things, because I think the difficulty is that most people think that to be a successful writer, they should model their work on that of successful writers. But the truth is, if you're going to be a successful writer, it won't be because of them. It'll be because of something in you, that you've got some viewpoint, you've got some take on a working class childhood or whatever it is, that you can express better than other people. And you can pull people into the predicament who don't share it, who don't know it, who don't understand it. And that, I think, is a very key element that only you can offer. I mean, obviously, I haven't any idea what all your special areas are, but you have, and you know what you understand, whether it's having a bloody awful childhood, you know what you understand in a way that other people don't. And I think you have to build on that.
Fantastic, thank you.
brilliant piece of advice. Thank you, Julian. Alan.
Well, I totally support this concept of keep writing every day if you can. I wrote a poem about homeless people. I then turned it into a short story, and somebody read it and said, why don't you make that a play? So I've just finished a sort of 60-page play about homeless people, which started off as a one-sided poem, and it's just developed and developed and developed over the last two years. Now I've now got to go do something with it, because I don't think I can reinvent the wheel anymore.
You can't, well, I think you can do something with it, but I can't imagine anything more topical. So my advice would be to trudge the rounds of pub theatres and that kind of thing, because even a very modest production can be seen by other people. And when you've done that, I mean, my friend Bill Nicholson, he first wrote that film about C.S. Lewis, you know, with Anthony Hopkins, Shadowlands. That was a radio play. Then it was a play in some provincial theatre. Then it was a play in London. Then it was a television. Then it was a big Hollywood movie. I mean, you never know where these things can go, but you just have to keep driving them. And obviously your next step is to get it put on. It absolutely doesn't matter where, because then you've got a production that you can get people to see, and you can say, look, it's a play, it exists. And it's very key. But I mean, I think homelessness is so much an issue at the moment that I can't believe that you couldn't get someone to read it.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Neil.
Just that I thought the keep going, keep writing is simple and most effective thing. I've got to do that. And I've got to go and get in the car and get down from Isle of Skye down to Edinburgh to fly down to London to see you guys on Saturday afternoon. Thank you. And that has been my sister's dog's first flight since the pandemic started 3 years ago today, I think it is. So thank you.
Oh, that sounds rather more exciting. I hope you have a good weekend.
Thanks, Neil. Vanessa.
Well, this has been the treat of my life. This has been amazing. Thank you so much for having me here. And I think we can be our own biggest critics a lot of the time. And one thing that you said that I think I can apply to many parts is you can be marvelous, but not get your break. And I'm really going to hold that in many elements of my life, that because I think we can say, oh, we're not doing well because this hasn't worked out, and we're not doing well this, you know, but we are all marvelous. And it just because we haven't had a break doesn't mean that we're not marvelous.
It really doesn't. It really doesn't.
Thank you so much.
And when I, rather nice story, when I did win the Oscar, there was a great cheer in the Writers' Guild. And the reason, as I later learned, was because it was a sort of donnée in Los Angeles, that if you had any talent, by the time you were 32 or 3, it would already have manifested itself. And so there was no point in reading a script written by someone of 50 that you hadn't heard of. And I was the end of that. Nobody had heard of me, and it was my first film script, and I'd written it at 51. And so I was the disproof of that Los Angeles custom. And I think, you know, we have to remember that sometimes you get lucky. And just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it won't. And just because it hasn't happened doesn't mean your writing is not very good. It could be very good indeed.
Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Sue.
Oh, the thing that will stick with me is calm down. I mean, anybody who knows me will agree. I just frankly need to calm down every so often. So thank you.
I second that.
Me too.
Brilliant. Thanks.
Rahman.
Thank you, Julian. Just a yet another prod to keep writing, keep writing, keep writing. So I will go back to my memoir and keep writing. Thank you for an inspirational day. I really appreciate it.
Sarah, Basil.
Is that me? So sorry.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. This has been awesome, to use a Saza word. So I am going to be doing a RBL comedy show, and I'm going to work on my 5-minute comedy show because I've parked it. I'm going to get it back out, and I'm going to make it funnier than it was.
Oh, well done. I hope that goes well. Good.
Pants before socks, Sue. Pants before socks.
Pants before socks. We won't explain that to anybody, but
No.
I know what you mean.
And last but not least, our interviewer, Richie.
Julian, thank you very much for this afternoon. That's been absolutely amazing. I've learned so much from you. You mentioned earlier that to try and get a 10-minute interview or coffee with somebody, I think that was today was my 10-minute interview coffee. It's given me a kick up the bum as well. Thank you very much for that. And I think we've got to take our adversity that we've taken on board, because as veterans, we're selfless people. And we need to be a little bit selfish now and try and get our creative juices going and trying to get our work out there. And you just give me a kick up the bum to get it done. I've written 3 films, 2 TV series, and none of it's ever been filmed. And I'm more determined how to get it done. And I'm going to be really cheeky as well. Do you mind if I send you a script?
Oh, God. I'm not supposed to read an unsolicited script in these litigious days.
Yeah.
So I know my lawyer will tell me off.
Yeah, exactly.
What I would say is, all of those scripts are in your bottom drawer waiting to be taken out. When I did Gosford, I had the usual lot of unmade scripts. And 3 of them have been made into films and telly since then. So don't give up on them just because they haven't been made yet.